Welcome, everyone, to another session of Caring Conversations. I am Natasha Euing Johnson, and I get to host another conversation with an incredible woman in the community. She is actually the owner of Lighthouse Hospice. In fact, it is the hospice program that my mother is a part of, and she gets to introduce herself. So, Jocelyn, tell my audience a little bit about yourself, who you are, and what you do. I want to dive right into a conversation because we're both caregivers, and there's so much to be said. And she is a wealth of information, and I'm super excited to have her on the program today. So, Jocelyn, tell our audience about who you are and what you do.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jocelyn Campbell. I'm the owner of the Lighthouse Community Hospice located in McDonough, Georgia. I am not only a caregiver for my family, but I am a caregiver for people in the community who have life-limiting illnesses. So I'm excited to be here today, speaking not only with a very good friend and client, but this is a very, very necessary conversation. So I was so excited to be invited here today.
Awesome. So we were on the phone a couple of weeks ago, I think it was, and we just started talking about just how much as caregivers is on us and how we neglect ourselves, the need to put boundaries in place. So there are so many ways we can take this conversation today. So let's just start first as you as a caregiver, starting this journey. Did you really think it was going to be, even as a caregiver yourself, without providing resources for the rest of the community? Talk about how that differentiates, because I know you've transitioned to be a caregiver now in your life, but you've been in this industry for quite a while, and you've worked with caregivers, provided them resources, provided them help. Talk a little bit about your transition and from being a caregiver to actually providing resources as well.
And I'm going to share a little bit of my personal story. I have 4 siblings. So my father is late, but my mom is still with us, and she is in her mid-80s. So at this point, she does need, supplemental care. She's not 100% in terms of needing care from her children, but it was time for her to live with someone. And so because I'm the youngest, and I think the relationship with my mother and I was the closest. And because it was, that was always my promise to her as a young kid. I was like, Mommy, it's always going to be you and I. I'm going to take care of you when you get old. So, my oldest sister took care of my grandmother when I was younger. My middle sister took care of my dad when he was transitioning. I have a brother. He hasn't had a caregiving role, but the assumption was always that I would be my mother's caregiver, and just by the nature of our relationship. But, at the end of the day, my mom has 4 kids, so no one really knows the toll that it takes on one child. I didn't know then that, the burden it was for my oldest sister with my grandmother. She did have support from my hospice when my grandmother needed the help. But my middle sister, I think I was in college when she took care of my dad, and she did it pretty much alone. My brother was in the military or wherever he was, and my oldest sister just didn't participate. And she had that burden alone. And so I didn't understand then, and I hadn't gotten into end of life care and just becoming a professional caregiver. And so in the last few years, as I saw my mom age, and get a little slower, need a little help with this and that, I'm like, okay, it's time. So when COVID hit, she was just leaving from a visit, but I went back to go get her because I wanted her to be with us for COVID. And that visit turned into a permanent stay. So not only were we not prepared in terms of planning, it was an improvised effort to be able to accommodate her. The house was not ready, meaning that, she is impaired with steps. So showers, bathrooms, you have to think about all of those when you're caregiving for a loved one that is aging and dealing with illness. So it was literally a race against time to get this for this to happen. And literally within two weeks of her being in my house, she fell in the tub and broke her hip. Gosh. So now we've added extra to it. And that partial help that she needed transitioned into full-time help, bathing, caregiving, meals, everything, where she still had some independence. So immediately my life changed and my daughter's life changed because she was in the house. So you think about the individuals that are also in the home. You think, okay, well, I'm just the primary caregiver, but everybody in the home gets affected.
That is, yeah.
Gets
And you have
affected.
the same issue I have having I call it a multi-generational home, right?
Yes.
I am not just a caregiver for my mom, but also a caregiver. And I can relate so much to your story because in the middle of COVID, my mom had always lived with me on and off. But in the middle of COVID, my dad got COVID. And she calls me, she's like, "Ma, your dad's coughing. This is like 2 months into COVID, literally." And COVID had just started. We had just come out of, we're in shelter in place. And she's like, "I think your dad's sick." So I was like, "Mom, I'm on my way to get you." I roll up on our house and I put on a mask and I was like, "Get in the car." I was like, "Daddy, you stay over there." And she never went back home, basically. So,
Right.
So, yeah.
It's funny how we know that it's coming. And like I said, not even just end of life conversations, but we don't want to think about our parents or our loved ones aging. So, the idea of actually planning for them aging is kind of remote. And we're in the middle, like you said, when you're living with multi-generational families, you're focused on your primary family, the kids and the activities and the things that we have going on. And you don't, you like, I have time. You always think you have time. And it just snuck up on me. You don't. It snuck up on me. I see it sneaking up on families that we care for in hospice. And you're like, what am I to do? So immediately you get into crisis.
So what advice would you give to someone who's not a caregiver today? Because that really brings up a good point. I mean, I think better planning, but how do you plan for that? Because it almost feels like, I'm a positive and optimistic person, and you always want to think that things are going to go well, right?
Right.
But like last year when I had to make the really difficult decision to put my mom in hospice because I was just simply exhausted.
Mm-hmm.
She is a 30-year survivor of congestive heart failure. And but her health was just deteriorating to the point where I could not do it by myself anymore. And I just had never given thought to hospice care, or she was in palliative care for a couple of weeks there. And it was just a lot going through my mind and really not being prepared for just the robustness of the role as a caregiver. So how do you get prepared for it? What do you think you'd give advice to someone as they have an aging parent in their life?
I think that we have to face that, time is not on anyone's side.
Yeah.
A lot of times we're focused on our careers and, like I said, raising the children, but we have to take a concerted effort to sit down and say, I need to do advanced care planning with my loved one. I think we need to ask the hard questions about what they want in terms of their care needs and what resources are actually available, because what you perceive is there versus what is actually there becomes two different conversations.
Oh my gosh.
It becomes impactful financially. It becomes impactful emotionally. It becomes impactful physically. I had to remind my mom when she broke her hip, I was picking up a 170-pound woman. I said, "Mommy, I'm almost 50. My back hurts too." And all she saw was her baby.
Yeah.
So she didn't, she's like, she's like, you're the strong one, and I'm sitting there lifting dead weight per se, because they help her with mobility. So we have to think about how do we preserve not only our emotional selves, but our physical selves too.
Oh my gosh.
That's our health. So all of these things come into play. And so now as caregivers, and that you have an aging parent, this is the conversation that I'm having with all of my friends now. Literally, it's not the running joke, but I can tell you every other day in my circle of friends, somebody's talking about a parent that they're having to go check on, or a parent that's already moving in, and nobody plans. No, it's not like, okay, well, the family assets have to be moved, or what has to be, has to happen. These conversations, like I said, we're moving. I think that people in general are more intellectually capable because they look at the careers, they plan out their children's lives.
Mhm.
You need to start planning for parents. You have to backtrack and start looking at, okay, well, I need a care plan for my child. We plan for the
Wow.
kids to go to college. We plan for their futures. You
Mhm.
also have to plan for your parents' future and how it's going to impact your career, your family, your emotional state, your financial, resources, because it all, depending on family dynamics and what is existing, I am 100% responsible for my mom financially, physically, everything.
Yeah.
But she has 4 children. So when we got to the place of, I think, my evolution, I think, in growth with the hospice, and being able to see this repeated pattern with families, I started thinking, how do I preserve myself? Because I did see even me breaking down as a caregiver. So that was a conversation had with my siblings that was not a very good conversation. The conversation turned into argument. It turned into accusation. It turned into every emotion that you could possibly get, because as far as they're concerned, they're pointing a finger and saying it's your turn. But I'm pointing a finger back, and I regained my power, and I said, I need to establish some boundaries in terms of me being able to establish some parameters for my own self-care, because I'm going to go down. And when I go down, not only am I going to take mommy down, I'm going to take my daughter down with me, because I'm the primary caregiver. And so they heard me, but I'm not sure that they listened.
And that's the hard part, because, I'm the oldest of 5, and having those conversations, I remember, I think my mom had COVID. She didn't test positive, but the doctor diagnosed her with pneumonia in the midst of COVID. And I remember physically picking her up and trying, because she was coughing so much, and I had to prop her up on pillows. That's before I got an adjustable bed for her, because I was so exhausted. And I'm a real estate agent. I'm out showing homes, coming home to take care of her. And I was exhausted physically, mentally, emotionally. And then I had my kids at home because they were all everybody's locked in the house with me. I have 3 teenage girls, and they were at each other's throats. And I'm thinking, okay, how am I going to survive this? Right. And it was at that point I sent this long text to my family going, I need help. I can't do this by myself. And, everybody did not want to have that conversation right there and then. And everybody wasn't responsive. I had 2 of my siblings help me purchase an adjustable bed for her, and get it delivered to the house, and I was thinking, because I was like, I can't do it. But sometimes I feel like they don't care. They don't hear because they're not physically there. Mm-hmm. And they've always seen, especially in our community as Black women, our mothers have always been strong. And literally, I heard someone say to me one time, oh, it's no problem. Natasha's strong. She can handle it. And I looked at them like, are you kidding me? I'm human.
And I found that the biggest strength is asking for help, because we don't ask for help. One of the things that I was doing to cope emotionally, because I'm also dealing in a very, very emotionally draining industry, my garage was my therapy space for years. Every day when I closed from work, before I went into the house, I was trying to release some of that exhaustive energy, and I would sit in the car for 15 to 20 minutes, and my daughter would
do that too?
Yes. Like I said, the car was the therapy place, because I knew the second shift started time I walked in the house. Yep. So it's dinner for my daughter, who eats one thing. It's a dinner for my mom, who eats another thing, and then I'm in the middle, I might eat, I may not eat. And then we have to figure out, what are we doing for this week? Because like you said, you still have children's activities. You still have work stuff going on. At the time I was building a business. So the pressures for me were, I think everybody has different pressures, but they was still pressure. So I took it upon myself, because this is the thing I tell my caregivers, in the hospice. I said, put your oxygen mask on. It's okay. Yeah. And so that guilt that I felt about telling my mommy the promise, and mommy, I'm going to take care of you. I said, and I told her, I said, mommy, I can't do it all. I said, I need some help. I said, you're not a burden. She said, I don't want to be a burden. Put me in a nursing home. I said, oh, I said, you wouldn't survive 2 days in a nursing home.
Okay.
It's not the same as it used to be. Yeah. And it's sad because, elders aren't respected the way that they should be respected in this country, given the level of love and care that they should be when they are in facilities. But culturally, people of color, don't traditionally put their loved ones in nursing facilities unless it's a last option. Yeah. So I was like, Mommy, that's not something I'll ever do, but I need to ask for help. And so my siblings were angry with me. And when I told them, and I had the conversation 2 or 3 times where they heard me and didn't listen. But when I put my foot down and I put it in writing, not only in a text, I said, and I gave them instructions, and this is what's going to happen because I'm not going to be present to do X, Y, and Z. So you guys need to decide who's going to take this role, who's going to take this role, and who's going to take this role. I still have 2 of them that are not speaking to me right now. But I have to be okay with that because I was perishing quickly. Yeah. I was perishing quickly. I had to put my oxygen mask on. And I was also in a transitional phase where I had a daughter that was starting to go to college. Yeah. So life is changing a whole lot. Financial resources are changing a whole lot. Mm-hmm. I'm still having to run a business. And I'm like, can't y'all just help me? We're family, aren't we? And then of course, there are always other dynamics that go along with that in terms of, why people do what they do and why they don't do what they do and what are the contributing factors. But at the end of the day, my mom has 4 children. Yeah. So they now understand that they have a role in her caregiving. And one of my sisters has stepped up. And the funny part about it has worked out, what they thought wasn't going to work. And my mom was very okay with it, with the arrangements that I made for her and how we were going to collectively care for her. She's like, and she told me, she said, you're the baby. Everybody else has lived their lives. It is time to share responsibilities. And she released me from, some of this burden emotionally that I was even caring about that. So she will always be cared for. But like I said, I had to pull, I don't want to call a stunt, or I had to just put my foot down and make sure that my siblings became participatory caregivers in her care. Yeah. And it's working out. And nobody's life has been so impacted that or they're like, oh, they were like, okay. And so I said, sometimes you have to force people into change so that you can survive. I needed to survive because I was drowning. I was literally drowning. And nobody ever asked me, how are you? Come on. How are you? That is. They assume you're just going to make it through.
Exactly. And I think that is part of the emotional weight that, I carried for a long time, because it was like, is anybody going to care? I feel last year when my mom came out of the hospital, I remember her she was just in really a bad state. She was afraid to sleep by herself. I slept in the room right outside her room. That's when she got first put in hospice, and she was on, 100% oxygen. She's off oxygen as much as she needs right now. She's just on supplementary oxygen. And she was terrified all the time. Like, she would not sleep through the night. She would call me in the middle of the night. I wasn't getting any rest and working all day long, running to kids' activities. And I felt myself mentally breaking down. And I literally had to go seek a counselor out to just talk it through, because literally in the midst of that, nobody called to check on me, say, hey, are you okay? Let me take you out to lunch. Let's have a conversation, and it's what I needed at the time, because it was like, I didn't even have time. Like, I used to work out all the time. I don't even have time to work out. I've gained weight, all of these things. And I was thinking, as I began to talk to other people, I realized I was not the only person in that predicament. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people call me and say, how's your mom? I'm like, she's great. She's doing okay. Everything is well. But I could probably count on one hand the number of people who say, hey, Natasha, you okay?
Right.
My best friend would probably be the only person that's really called me and say, you okay? I'm like, it's been a tough day, And so having those resources, having a support system, I think is important in place. Mm-hmm. And expressing that need. And that's why I'm wanting to have this conversation, because it helps people understand that, you reaching out to someone else and asking a caregiver, are you okay? Do you need somebody to talk to? It's so crucially important, because when I sat and talked to the counselor for the time that I was there, I learned that I didn't have boundaries in place, like you were just talking, and I needed to establish some boundaries for myself, for my family, for my mental, emotional well-being. And I'm a believer, I'm a Christian, and I would pray and do all that stuff, but talking it out sometimes helps you decompress.
Mm-hmm.
And you need to have that decompression time. And talking about guilt. So talk to me a little bit about how you work through some of the kids. I know, like, the guilt of it all, that is a huge thing that even when I talk to other people, that people struggle with.
So, and even as I made new arrangements for how we're going to provide caregiving for my mom moving forward so that I could actually breathe. Like you said, having somebody to talk that with you. Luckily, my best friend is dealing with the same thing. It's like my friends are dropping into the club every month.
We need to have the caregiving club, right?
Yeah, and those conversations be so, sometimes you got to laugh through it so that you don't cry. And it becomes, my girlfriend who's my best friend, she said, I'm, having to deal with both of my parents, and they both have their different illnesses, and they're still trying to have their quality of life. And I said, she has more patience than me, and I thank God for it. She's like, I have the scooter parade. I got both my parents and my mother-in-law, 3 people on a scooter, and I'm just, alone. So, those are the days you laugh about it,
Yeah.
So you think about it, and she has siblings too. So everybody's dealing with dynamics. I think sometimes you have a parent that may trust one sibling a little bit more, or they know that, trust one child, or know that one child is more nurturing, or one child has more resources, and they lean on you, but don't necessarily realize the impact. I was very transparent with my mom, and I think that transparency, she took into consideration, and she understood what I was speaking about without, like I said, I think she released me from that guilt. But also, like I said, having a peer group or some friends that you can talk to. Everybody in our age group is going through it, but we're also at the age where we're starting to get older too, and we're sending kids off, and those kids don't have the resources that we have. So now that mortality, and we have to think about, how are we going to take care of ourselves? My kid has blatantly told me, Mommy, this is not for me. I'm going to have to make enough money so I can hire somebody to help you. But the reality of it is, now I'm thinking, okay, like, how I need to be figuring, so now, like I said, the financial impacts of caring for a parent versus balancing out somebody who is in middle age, your retirement strategy, and how you make sure that you have something in place, because you may not have a child that can take care of you, because Gen X, Gen Y, Gen Z don't have the same resources and access. They just don't.
I feel like almost emotional maturity to handle.
Yeah, and the emotional maturity.
Yeah.
So now you're like, I'm looking forward, trying to take care. So I said, I have to balance this thing out. I have to level this thing out. I only have one child. And so I don't want the caregiving burden to be on her, because she's just one. If I had 2 or 3 kids, I'd be like, okay, well, they'll be fine. They can spread this thing out. So now I'm looking forward, I'm looking backwards, and I'm in the middle of it all, trying to, juggle the 3-ring circus. So I'm like, okay, so my respite and my relief comes with talking too. Like right now, I can tell you, I got 5 girlfriends. This conversation happens every day about one of the parents. 2 of my girlfriends are dealing with issues with their fathers who have health things. They're having to drive out of state. One young lady's an attorney. She's having to drive out of state twice a week, to go check on her dad, and she has another sibling. So we have those dynamics where we have other siblings, they're just not as participatory. And so we become the support system. But I had gotten so numb with people not asking me, how are you? I said, I got to check in with me.
Yeah.
And I, it took therapy too, because like I said, we don't think that we're valuable enough for ourselves to give ourselves that same energy we give to the people that we love.
Yeah.
I was like, it's time for me to love on me and nurture me a little bit. And I read something one day that was very pivotal to me. It says, we're born looking like our parents. We die looking like our choices.
Mm.
And I said, my
Wow,
mother and
that's
my
profound.
father
Yeah.
made the best choices that they could make for their life.
Yeah, based on what they knew at that time. Yeah.
But their choices have led them to have, or led my mom to have to live with me and me become a primary caregiver. So I own those decisions. Not that she doesn't get a vote in, it's not a dictatorship in it, but
Mhm.
primarily I have to look at how I frame our collective living so it has its minimum impact on my daughter, a
Mhm.
minimum impact on me, because we still got a whole bunch of living to do.
Yeah.
And without 100% compromising her need for care. And that was the second, I think, turning point, and in making me to start thinking about, how do I establish boundaries? Like I said, I talk to my hospice families about it all the time, and how that they have to ask for help, how they have to ask us for help when they need help, and that's what we're there for. But yet I found myself in a corner somewhere about the
Ah,
because I would not ask for help. So
yes.
I'm the help asking for queen now. you know, and the worst they can do is say no. I can say I tried.
Hmm.
But I found that when I forced my siblings into a situation where they had to help, they stood up, they came to the plate.
Yeah.
They did it because nobody was forcing them to do it. But and it's not that they don't love my mom as much as I do. They just, everybody has their lives. She's had another health crisis. My mom is also dealing with the CHF, and she's had open heart surgery. My siblings were there for the first 2 weeks.
Mm.
Well, but my mom took over a year to recover. I was the one who was, the caregiver at
Wow.
4 o'clock, getting my kid up, taking her to the hospital, and then, dropping her off at school, coming back, picking her up, giving her some dinner, and us sleeping in the chair at the hospital for 6 weeks. So my daughter was also impacted.
Yeah.
She was sleeping in the chair in the hospital with me, but my other siblings were gone back to their lives.
Mhm.
One was going back to Chicago, one was going back to Tennessee, one was coming back to Georgia. So I was like, okay, we're in this together. We truly are in this together. So, like I said, if they don't want to volunteer, I'm going to recruit them. And I'm not only going to recruit their physical presence, I'm going to recruit their financial presence.
So wow, yeah.
And so, that's also a sticky thing to navigate.
That's a very, very sticky thing to navigate because my gosh, it was just, I remember when I had to make modifications to the house because I had to take out the tub and put in a walk-in shower for my mom, and reaching out to my siblings. I still have one sibling who didn't contribute to the whole thing at all because they felt like, oh, I'm upgrading your house. I was like, no, this is for your mama. She can't get in the tub, or she can't lift her feet to get. I need her to have a walk-in shower. And
Mhm.
it was just like they didn't comprehend it. And I could not, it hurt. I'll be honest, it hurt. And when they said that to me, and I thought, this is not even cool, right?
Mhm.
And they refuse to contribute financially because they're living their own lives. They got their own kids, and I'm thinking, I got kids too.
Mhm.
I've got things I want to do with them. I would love, when I have to go on vacation or take a trip somewhere, I have to consider, okay, who's going to be with my mom? How is my mom going to be taken care of? And I swear I have a saint of a husband because he has volunteered before to stay back so that me and the girls will go on a quick, overnight trip. But I'm like, babe, you got to go too. We're a family. And
Mhm.
so putting those boundaries in place and saying, you know what, mom, you're going to go to this sibling's house because we're going to be gone because she doesn't want to travel. She doesn't want to go anywhere. And I'm okay with that. But at the
Mhm.
same time, I've got to protect
Life
them.
still goes on for you, the rest of you guys.
And
And that's what I told my mom. I said,
I
I
got,
still have living to do.
yeah. And you want to live, right? Um,
Mhm.
you can't put yourself in a box. You cannot remain isolated and not really express your wants and needs. And I want to talk a little bit about hospice. I think when you and I had that conversation, um, so a little bit background to the story. My mom was on palliative care, and all of a sudden she had an altered mental state, and I knew something was off. And I put her in the car And it was a very grueling car ride, and took her to the hospital. And when we arrived there, after spending all night in the ER, which they somehow neglected us, they forgot that we were there. I was like, oh God. And I had to advocate for her. And then that's a whole different story, advocating
That's
for
a
a
whole
parent.
nother one.
And it was just grueling. And being in the ER and having her checked in and everything. And I went literally 48 hours without sleep, because I couldn't leave her by herself. And I think I went out. My brother came up to the ER with me. He stayed for a few hours with us. He helped tremendously because we had to put her in a wheelchair. And like, she wanted to use the bathroom on herself in the ER when we finally got into a room, and trying to corral nurses to help me, and it was clean her up, and it was just a crazy, crazy life for me. And I had to keep my eye, because she was like, altered mental state. She wasn't in her right mind. She was like, I need to jump out the window. So I couldn't leave her alone. I could close my eyes. She would try to get out the bed, pull out the the IV. It was just crazy stuff. And, we finally got her calmed down, and they medicated her and things like that, but I still wouldn't go to sleep.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember having a conversation with you, and my emotions were all over the place. Exteriorly, people look at me as a strong person, but internally, I was in complete turmoil. And I remember going out to my car and just praying and crying and saying, God, I don't know what to do. And I think I called you. Did I call you? I think I called you.
Call me.
And I said, Jocelyn, talk to me a little bit about hospice. And it's probably one of the best decisions I made, because I got help that I needed after all these years of being a solo agent. And it wasn't as scary as I thought it was going to be, because for me, I think there's a lot of misinformation about what hospice is and the support it provides. So you've been in this industry, in this business, and in the caregiving arena. Talk to me a little bit about what it is, what you do, and how it can help families and caregivers as a whole.
This is my whole mission in life. I think that God has me walking in my purpose. And, death is taboo culturally in America. In a lot of cultures, the process of being is celebrated to be able to have a full and long life. Sometimes there's tragedies, of course, that lives are cut short. But if God has blessed you with a full and long life, it should be celebrated. But for whatever reasons in America, the idea of transitioning into, the winter season of living is very taboo. And one of the things, I wrote a book, it's for physicians, but there's a quote that I put in, and I said, everybody wants to go to heaven, but nobody wants to die.
Yeah.
We're looking for the promise on the other side because of our cultural belief, because of our religious belief. But I think that we neglected, there's a gap in our healthcare system and in our culture that says it's okay, because when someone is pregnant, you have the elders, you have everybody in the community giving that new mom advice about you bringing this new life. Nobody teaches you how to be a parent. The same thing, nobody teaches you how to die. It's experiential, and it's very different for different individuals and different families. So how do you get through it? It's another new experience, and it can be scary. It can be a scary process in terms of transitioning and illness that sometimes is associated with, a person who's getting ready to die. But that's where hospice comes in and fills the gap. Hospice has been around almost 60 years, but only 5% of people of color use hospice, and maybe 70% of non people of color use hospice. So there's a greater awareness in other communities about hospice, but there are still some gaps because there are cultural differences in how people die. So whether you are Asian, or whether you have different religious beliefs, or whether you may be Muslim or maybe Indian or Hindu, people die differently. So hospice is is not, from a clinical standpoint, is a one-stop shop, because it's going to provide you a physician. It's going to provide you with nursing, registered nursing support. It's going to provide you with certified nursing aides, a social worker, and a chaplain. So it's holistic in terms of the care. But a good hospice will recognize that families need different resources, because the dying process or the support system needed is different. And that's when the plans for care are customized. This family needs this. This family needs this. But hospice is not just for the patient. Hospice is for the entire family, and especially the caregiver, because the caregiver burnout is real. So
Yes.
when I introduce hospice to you, I try to take the stigma out of it, and I try to tell you, we try to normalize the conversation. This is another healthcare resource that people can use to provide care and support for their loved one. And so the difference is it's either done in the home or wherever they live. So the person can be in a comfortable setting, and so you don't have the recycled visits to the emergency room, because that's one of the things. The emergency room, like you just articulated your experience in the emergency room. So it took that long to get care, but hospice usually has a 1 hour response time. We should have a nurse always within 1 hour of a patient or a patient's care if they go into crisis. So that's one of the benefits and the blessings. Instead of you having to take, your loved one to the emergency room, we bring the care to you and to get that patient stabilized. The second benefit of hospice is that, it's covered because it's covered by Medicare, Medicaid, and most private insurance. The medications associated with the hospice diagnosis is paid for under those provisions, and also any durable medical equipment. So if your loved one needs anything like an adjustable toilet seat or a Hoyer lift to help in lifting, like I told you, I was lifting my mom in dead weight, 170 pounds, a Hoyer lift or any durable medical equipment your loved one may need in the process of their care is covered under that hospice benefit. So now you've also minimized the financial impact of medical care. When my mom was in the hospital the last time when she had open heart surgery, her bill was over $1 million.
Wow.
And I was like, oh my God, this is going to wipe our family out. And by the grace of God, she had some decent insurance, and, it covered the majority of the bill when it was over. But $80,000 is still a lot of money. She didn't have it. So guess where it came from?
Yeah.
Me. So families have the financial impact. So hospice takes off that burden, without the thinking that, my whole life financially is also going to get turned around with going back and forth to the hospital, doctor's bills and everything. So that is relieved. So
I think the misguided understanding for hospice is that if you put someone in hospice, they're going to die immediately. Like
that's a misgiving.
And my mom has been in hospice for a year.
Mm-hmm.
I think 3 weeks ago, she had a mild heart attack here. And because I've been a caregiver for so long, I know signs. I called the nurse, she showed up within an hour. I gave her some nitroglycerin. We did our thing at the house, and she's fine. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
She's still here. And
so the clinical diagnosis of an appropriate hospice patient is a patient that has a terminal diagnosis of 6 months or less.
Yeah.
But CMS guidelines say we don't know the day or the hour a person transitions.
Exactly.
So that doesn't mean that they have to, they're going to die next week or next month. I've had, by the grace of God, and God does still perform miracles, I've had a couple of patients that I've had to bring off of hospice because their level of health care actually got better. And that's one of the benefits actually of hospice. People don't realize statistically, when a patient goes on hospice, because they get so much attention that's personalized to them, their care and their affect usually gets much better. Before they move into another level of decline. It gives people the time to resolve what they need to resolve, to prepare for what they need to prepare for, to, have conversations that need to be had. It buys you a little bit more time because their quality of health usually goes back up because they got somebody putting hands on them, touching them, seeing them, caring for them on a regular basis. And I think I'm so happy that President Jimmy Carter decided to choose hospice. He's the first American president to choose hospice, and he chose it, I think, almost 4 months ago. And the world now sees that you don't die in 2 days. He's still alive, you know.
And I think that's the misguided understanding of it, because, you know, like my mom and I have had this conversation. I'm like, well, do you think you're ready to come off of hospice? Until, of course, when we had that conversation, she had a heart attack, and I was thinking, I think maybe not. You know?
Yeah.
Yeah, because I didn't have to rush her to the ER, and I didn't have to go through well, maybe, I don't know, you know. We'll hang in here a little bit longer. But, you know, it is possible for patients to come off of hospice. And
it is possible for patients to come off.
Yeah, because I think people are afraid of the unknown of it, and the constant ongoing feeling of, oh my gosh, if the person's going to die when they're on hospice. And that's not necessarily true. So, but, you know, it's giving you the support. And I think that recognition helps me tremendously, because I realize, oh my gosh, I need that support.
And this is where the healthcare system is broken. You know, when you have a loved one that might have been in the hospital, and you have a case manager and you have a doctor come in and talk to you, you're already overwhelmed. They bombarded you with information. Like you said, you probably sleep deficit, all these coming on, and they're trying to discharge your loved one. That case manager has 15 patients they're trying to get out of hospital that day. And to explain to you the benefits of hospice and how it works, and to get your questions answered in a comprehensive manner, they don't do the best job. Not that they're not doing their job. They just don't do the best job. And I think one of the things that people also, I know that people don't realize, which prompted me to write the book, is doctors aren't required palliative training in medical school. So right now in America, it's 155 medical schools, and only 32% of those medical schools have any type of palliative or end-of-life programs. And that may be anywhere from 2 weeks to, you know, a month of training on end-of-life care. And that's not enough for a doctor to get the emotional intelligence, the medical information they need to be able to make a cognitive decision, to be able to articulate to families, which is a lot of reasons why doctors avoid the conversation. Yeah. They turn it over to the case managers and let the case managers handle it. Or either they're going to continue to work on your loved one with unnecessary tests because they don't have the answer in how to heal, but don't recognize that choosing hospice is a healthcare option, and it's a quality of life option. So that's one of the areas of advocacy that we've been trying to do. And I've personally taken on in terms of education and getting this book in medical schools, so doctors can give families this choice, because they're not giving families the choice, because who wants to keep running back and forth to the ER, you know, and you know that you're not. I didn't. Right. You want to be an active advocate for your loved one, but the healthcare system has some clinks in the chain. Yeah. So hospice fills that gap in this transitional period. And not just, like I said, it doesn't say that you're leaving here tomorrow, but you bring the healthcare home. And that's exactly what it does. It brings the healthcare home.
I like that concept. It really did. Like, you know, my mom is in love with her CNA. She just will, like, you know, she will do anything for her CNA. That helps her shower and get ready in the day, and, you know, get her basic care needs taken care of on the weekdays. Because, you know, I'm busy. I'm running with the kids. I'm running in and out. Like today, her hands are, I don't know if it's a change of weather, extremely athletic. Like her finger is swollen, and she couldn't even, like, normally she can get some minor things done herself, but like this morning I had to do everything for her, like get her tea and get her breakfast together. And she's like, I can't even pick up the box of cereal. I was like, I got you, Mom. So, you know, it's kind of like, so I'm grateful for the CNA that comes in and helps her bathe and all that stuff, because I may not be able to do it all the time. So, yeah.
And so the other question that comes up, well, what's the difference between hospice and home care? So
Yeah.
the difference between hospice and home care, you may get the nursing visit, but you don't get the supplemental care in terms of having the social worker chaplain aspect and some of the medications paid for and the DME. But the biggest thing, like the respite, if you ever do need, even if it's caregiver breakdown, you need the respite for yourself. Hospice provides an opportunity to be able to provide respite for your loved one so that you can have a break. And home health does not do that. And also, hospice differs from home health in the fact that your loved one doesn't have to transition in an institutional setting.
Mm-hmm.
They get to determine what their end of life looks like, who they want around them at the last moments in time, how they want to manage their pain, how they want to manage their health. And it becomes a more calming transition. And you as a family get a chance to release that emotion in a more settled way versus being traumatized in like I said, a hospital or an institutional setting. So home health does not do that. And that's the difference. We will take you all the way to the end if you need to get to the end in terms of end of life. And like I said, and provide that support. And also hospice provides support up to a year in terms of grief counseling and support after the loss of a loved one. So you're not let go. The caregiver and the families are not let go, even after a loved one transitions. We are still in there now. The shift becomes to how do we make sure that this family, has all the grief resources they need and they are making it through and they're coping through this loss. So it's holistic for the entire family.
And I think that's an important. Oh, by the way, I didn't know I had respite, so I was like, really?
Yes.
How do I activate that? But just I think having this conversation really helps people bring clarity to that area, because I think there is so much. Because immediately there are things that come into your mind, right? Because of just not knowing, because you're not educated on it. There is not a lack of education. So this is what Caring Conversations is all about. It's like, what support resources are available? What can you do as a caregiver? My mom and I were having a conversation. She used to be a prayer intercessor at TBN here in Atlanta. And one of the intercessors that was taking care of his mother passed away. And suddenly, right? And, things like that get me to thinking, it's like, how many caregivers have passed away before the person that they have taken care of,
We have incidents of that happening on hospice. We have husbands and wives who are taking care. And I've had wives that passed away and their husbands are on hospice. And we're like, what happened? Because that caregiver strain. And you just brought up a very important point in terms of religion and how we perceive ourselves. And I go to a local Atlanta church, and I've had to, email my pastor a couple of times because, a couple of sermons have touched me like, and we're not going on hospice and God is going to heal. God has the ability to heal. He has, and we trust and believe that. But he didn't say don't get help on the process, because I can heal you in the hospital room, I can heal you in your home or whatever. And so, sometimes our churches put us in a position to have a false belief that we don't need to ask anyone else for help in that process. And it contributes to that guilt and that shame of us saying, I'm not going to ask, because if I ask for help, I'm not trusting God, or I don't believe that God can heal my mom, or that God can do this for my dad, or God can do this. God's going to do what God is going to do no matter what's around or whatever. So that's another, very, critical conversation that we have to have in our communities. I said,
I think that the fact that, again, misguided, it's like, do you not go to the hospital because God is able to heal? Right. I have had, I'm a pastor, I'm an associate pastor at my church. And I remember there were times in the hospital with my mom and me staying there, because I never let her stay alone. I'd always be at the hospital with her, because the nurses are overextended, right? So the personalized care does not exist in the hospital. We have a shortage of nurses. We have a shortage of staff. So the fact of the matter is that every time, from the first time she went into the hospital 30 years ago, I've always stayed there with her. She's had 3 heart attacks, a TIA, all kinds of stuff, pneumonia. Oh my gosh, double lung pneumonia several times. And I've always stayed there. But I like every hospital say I've told people is God sent, because we have prayed with nurses. I've had nurses come into the room and what, there's a scripture says, that Joseph said, what the enemy intended for evil, God turns it around for the good.
Mm-hmm.
And in the hospital, providing counsel and care and turning that into an altar of worship. I think people, their mindsets are so narrow in terms of like how you handle things. God can use any situation or anybody or anything. Some of the relationships that we have built over the years have been because of hospital stays,
Mm-hmm.
So and so it's not like we don't go to the doctor because we believe God can heal, right? We still go to the doctor. We still engage in caregiving activities because we want to identify those, right? So it's not necessarily, and I think there's a misguided or misunderstanding when it comes to that in ministry, because they think it's negative, and it's not. It isn't. I think God can use it. Because even here, I know my mom stays on the phone all the time praying for people. I think that's one of her outlets, right? She'll talk to people. She talks to your nurses all the time. If they leave here without a prayer, I want to know what happened that day. In her weakened state. One of my good friends called me.
Still pouring out.
She's still pouring out. Like the day she had the heart attack 3 weeks ago. My girlfriend called me. She was like, and I was talking about, we were in a prayer chat together. I said, well, pray for my mom. She just had a mild heart attack. She calls me. She was like, what do you mean your mom? She was just on the phone praying for me. I was like, yeah, it's what my mom does, It's like, but, it's kind of like people look at it as negative, and it's not. And I'm so glad that you opened up my eyes to this resource, because it has, like, every year, hands down, we've been in the hospital. This is the first year I have not had to, because, ironically, if I had a change of circumstance, when she was having chest pains, my first immediate response was pile her little tail in the car and hightail it to the ER,
Mm-hmm.
But and I could assess the situation. I'm not a medical person. I knew it was mild because she was still talking to me, but she was sweating, and I could recognize the signs that she was having chest pains. I went and grabbed the nitroglycerin. I called the nurse. I did the necessary, and I stay relatively calm in crisis. I've always been like that. It's just my personality. But we handled it, right? I put her on oxygen, and the nurse came over, examined her, and she was fine, And so, in contrast, if we had to go to the hospital, we'd be sitting in the ER.
You would have been there.
Would have been there, right? Running more tests, doing things. So I think the value added for me is that, as a whole, you can. I think the conversation needs to be had, and if you, as a caregiver, thinks that is a solution that may work for you, have that conversation with someone, because the diagnosis, like you said, maybe that diagnosis your loved one may have, there may be additional resources that are available to you via hospice that can help it as well. So.
And there has to be consideration for your loved one. How intrusive does healthcare become towards, in your winter seasons? I said, my mom is 86, and when she goes, because that's only in God's time. But she has clearly articulated, I don't want anybody poking and prodding on me. Now I'll go to my little annual exam, but don't have me in the hospital just laid up in there and letting them doing all of these things to me. So these are part of her advance directive. So I don't think that people know that that's an option for them. They just think that the doctor knows they're going to do everything, but you have a choice in your decisions, not only in your, end of life decisions, just in your health. Well, like I said, your mom's lucky enough to have you as an advocate, because even we know that people of color sometimes get ignored in the healthcare system. So to have somebody there actively, saying, what are my choices? And, in this process, what does my mom have? What can she do? What can we not do? Is very, very important. But like we have to frame those within the constraints of their age, their health, their personal wishes, the financial constraints that is going, the impact that it's going to have on you and your family. Who wants $1 million medical bill? My mom not just going to roll over and die. No, but that is all a consideration because the healthcare system, like I said, it has chinks in its armor. People are working aggressively right now to find solutions in some of the broken spaces in the healthcare system. But it's truly just that. And I think, like I said, because hospice is a resource that is funded through insurance and through Medicare and Medicaid, it doesn't have a financial impact to families. Why not use it?
Yeah.
Why not use it? And then use that, what other financial resources that you have to do the other supplemental stuff. And I was having a conversation with my daughter, like you mentioned, because I said, hey, I go sit on a couch. I got some things I'm working through. It's stressful. Life is hard. And she's like, oh, mommy, I would never use a therapist because, people can't, your mind or what. I said, so if you break your leg, don't you go to the doctor?
Yeah.
If your mind is breaking, if stressful, like I said, the caregiving breakdown, whatever it is, even if it's not a caregiver breakdown, you go get help. You ask for help. And it may be so much in terms of a therapist, but it becomes your support system. You have to tell your friends and family, even if they don't hear you the first time, you repeat it and you say it over and over again. I need help.
You've got to give a voice to your needs, because I think, especially as strong women, we feel like we should carry things all the time, and that is wrong.
I put stuff down all the time now. I'm a new person.
I'm like, no, and I've had to learn that because, like I said, I've been either partially or full-time a caregiver for 30 years. Mm-hmm. And I remember telling someone, I don't know any other life. Most of my life I have spent as a caregiver, and, and everyone leans to me. Let a medical crisis come up with one of my family's children. They're like, Natasha, I'm like, what? I'm not a doctor.
Even if you have to pick it back up, you have to put it down sometimes.
You have to pull it back down. And so put it down. And I have had to learn that, like I am making a conscious decision as I march into this latter part of the year to really say, okay, I'm going to take care of me. I'm going to do the things that are necessary to get me in order, to prioritize me so that I can be a better person for everyone involved. Mm-hmm. Mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and physically.
So and that is even a boundary with your children.
Yeah.
And I, we have a personal circle that we have, and y'all used to look at me like, as a single parent, y'all like, how is Jocelyn moving like this? But even as my child was born, I made a decision, and I didn't know then how pivotal it would be in my life. I still need my me time. We become mothers and we lose ourselves. And as daughters, we lose ourselves. As spouses, we lose ourselves. We give everybody a piece of us but us. And I made a concerted effort. Jocelyn is going to have her time because otherwise she will lose her mind. Yeah. And but I talked to my daughter from a very young age. I said, mommy needs, look, those 15 minutes in the garage, leave me alone. Those are my 15 minutes in the garage. I said, because I don't want to bring the energy from work home to you. And sometimes when I'm in the house, when they're working my nerves, I had to go to the garage to get away from what I was dealing with in my home. And I'm like, this is my garage time. It may seem crazy. Some people may need a prayer closet. Some people may need to do it in a massage or a walk or some exercise, but we cannot feel guilty about giving to ourselves. Yeah. Whether it's mental, physical, whatever rejuvenation we need to make it through the next day, because we're holding up mountains. Like I said, those bags become heavy. We may have to pick them back up, but we have to force ourselves to put them down and go breathe into ourselves and pour into ourselves, because nobody else is going to do it. If you can
I say this? I was telling somebody the other day, even Jesus pulled away from the crowds. And he went to the mountains to pray. That's why my favorite place is going to the mountains, because I find them so serene and so peaceful. And the only thing you hear is the birds chirping outside. I told my best friend, I was like, we're going glamping. We're making plans to go glamping because we're going to go sit out and just in nature and just soak it all in and allow ourselves to be refreshed.
And the funny part about it, I'm sorry for interrupting you when you said it, every time Jesus did give a sermon, he isolated himself and went and rejuvenated.
Keep pouring out.
That's a lesson in itself.
That is, you got to have a refueling time. And I'll be honest, I have not, like this year, I've had zero refueling time. So I'm looking to the end of this year, like, okay, I got to refuel Natasha because I am running below E, right? And when you're running below E, you're going to end up breaking down. Even your
that's what we keep telling ourselves. Oh, I'll do it. I'll do it in another month. Oh, but guess what? Then the holidays are coming up.
Yeah.
Other demands. You have to actively and proactively choose to give yourself that time. And then they're not there, with no pun intended, they're not going to die before you get back. You see what I'm saying? So if that means taking a half a day for you, if it's in the middle of the day while the kids are at school, you see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Well, and you're a minister and you know this. And so anybody who is faith-based knows that we can work all day, but God is still our provision. So whatever he has for us, he has for us. So if you stop that half day, he's still going to provide whatever he needs to provide for you.
And that right there is key, because I've had to, like, say, even with my real estate business, like, you know what? God has clients for me. I am not going to sweat this. He's going to take care of me.
What if your health gets compromised?
Exactly. And I'm watching, a realtor friend of mine, she just passed away. And it's kind of like, okay, these people are dropping like flies. I got to do something to take care of me, because it's, people don't realize how grueling real estate is. It is probably one of the most, I did not know this until I entered one of the most stressful jobs in the world.
Because you got to deal with everybody. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because you deal with people, and people got personalities, and personalities got problems.
Yeah.
They got emotional issues, mental issues, all kinds of stuff. I find myself counseling. I find myself as a marriage counselor sometimes. What y'all doing?
Because that industry is built on relationships too.
Yeah.
So when you talk about how you pour into nurses, it's special people that end up that are relational, you know, like healthcare providers. And when I met you, I was like, I don't even know where that energy comes from. It comes from a special place, because you are a people person, but that same energy that you pour into everybody, who's pouring it back into you?
And that is the
refilling your cup.
Yeah.
Who's refilling your cup? So I get it. You have to go somewhere and recharge your battery. And one of the things my daughter also says, and I think because it's an only child syndrome, and she gets overstimulated because our house is so quiet and, everything is so, ooh, and, she said, Mommy, my social battery is dead. I'm tired of dealing with folks. I said, oh, that's a good analogy. My social battery is dead.
Yeah.
I don't feel like dealing with you today.
Yeah.
Or I don't feel like dealing with this thing today.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So when your social battery goes on, when your phone goes low, you charge it, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
You got to recharge you.
Yep. And it's about time to recharge me, because I'm running on real low. My red light is beeping. It's like beep, beep. It's getting louder, louder every day. Because I was like, I got to do stuff. I got to get back in the gym. I haven't been gym in 6 months. I was like, Lord, I got to get back in the gym, because this fluffy, this ain't working for me.
Right.
But so what are some last words you would give to someone who is? I think what I want to end with here is planning the caregiving process. How do you start that conversation? You may have a parent today that in their 70s, they're in perfect health. It's not right now. How do you initiate as an adult that adult conversation? Hey, mom, hey, dad. Can we have a conversation?
Guess what?
How would you recommend us doing that?
I'm going to give you the answer to this in a story. Yeah. Mind you, I've owned a hospice for many years now. And my mom knows, and my whole family knows I'm in the end of life. I told you this conversation is taboo, even for the people in my family. Mm-hmm. So my mother did not have any advance directives in place. No, and she's like, well, I got a policy, that she done had for 50 years. And, sometimes them policies that we have for 50 years are $3,000, $5,000. They done paid 50 cents a dollar for them 50 years ago. And so one day I just told her, I said, well, when you die, I'm going to cremate you and put you in this urn here on the table. And, I'll celebrate with ancestors. I said, I'm not going to no cemetery because you're not there. God said, let the dead bury the dead. I said, so she said, what do you mean you're not coming to no cemetery? I said, I'm not coming to no cemetery. I'm going to put your urn right here on the table. Mm-hmm. So she walked off. She looked at me sideways and she walked off. About an hour later, she walked back into the kitchen. She said, you're not going to burn me up. She was like, That was the first time that she had ever said anything about her wishes and her advance. I said, okay, well, now I got the conversation up. I said, what do you mean? I'm not going to burn you up. I'm going to put you on the table. Now I'm just pushing her buttons. She said, I want to be buried. She said, I want to be buried in the family plot next to my mother and my father. She, at 83 years old, this was conversation. Now, mind you, she's 86. So this conversation is recent. At 83, where she would live with me and still would not have that conversation. And this is what I do every day. And I'm the professional and I help families. She would not have that conversation. So I had to find a roundabout, way to have
to start initiated. Yeah.
Yes. And to initiate it. So, what I find that when you take a choice away from people, that's when they assert their rights.
Yeah.
In life in general, things were taken care away from people of color. Then, we had the civil rights movement. So when you take away an individual's choice for the most part, that's when they start to speak. So you say,
maybe, hey, Mama, I'm gonna put you in a home when you get old,
Right. Right. So I pushed the button and I was like, well, okay, let me see where this goes. And then it opened the conversation. So and from that conversation, she has since articulated in various pieces everything that she wants done for her. She's like, you don't have to take me back to our hometown for a big funeral. I don't want anybody gawking at me, so you can do a closed casket, because they just gonna go there, So now it became less like, oh, you planning on me to leave tomorrow. You telling me what you want. Now she's saying, oh, well, your brother has this to do. He has this policy and this is whose name. Because, older people are very secretive. They are very, very secretive. So you have to get creative and because you want to be respectful of of the culture of who, how they were raised. And so you have to find a way to get that information out. But like you and I are at this age now, I've been talking to my daughter, since she can talk about, what my end of life wishes are. Now that she's in college, she has a spreadsheet with, policy numbers, account numbers, what's on auto pay, what's not on auto pay, because I love my family, but everybody in my family is not trustworthy. Yeah. And she's a minor. So now I have to pivot. I did an exercise with my nurses. Now we're in end of life care. And so it was it's an end of life card game. And it talked about, who would be the guardian of your children if, something happened to you. Most kids have godparents, but sometimes you don't. And life changes too. And, that was a pivotal moment for me when we did that game, because in my reality, I was thinking that one of my siblings would have custody of my child if something happened to me. But when what question was actually put in front of me and I had to write down one of my siblings' name because now I'm older and, I'm still here, I was like, I don't want one of my siblings to have custody of my child because one, I'm the baby. And they're going to do what they want to do because they got all the answers. You see what I'm saying? So it's certain things that I wanted for my daughter that I knew my best friend doesn't necessarily agree with in terms of maybe how I raised her or how I disciplined her, but she's respectful enough of my wishes to make sure that it would get done. Also, in terms of my end of life care, if I was in a traumatic accident, I said, I want 7 days. If I'm unconscious and I'm out and I can't be revived, I want 7 days. After that, let me go, because I believe my spirits are in God, in spirit, and I'll be somewhere in a comfortable place. Don't have me bedbound in a hospital, but I know my siblings don't have the strength to pull the plug. My best friend is a clinician and she knows the implications and she would pull the plug for me. So when we start facing our own mortality and the reality of how it's going to impact our other loved ones, I think the decisioning and the discussion becomes easier, because my mama flat out said, y'all will figure it out. My mom had, still had property, and she's like, well, y'all will figure it out. I was like, ma'am, I'm gonna need you to have a will, and even a lot of people don't know, wills and probates can be, in court for years. They have something called transfer on demand. You have, a home and situations.
I had a trust established. I put all my property and everything in trust. Yeah.
And so, a trust still is subject to taxes, but it's some other things that go with that. You can just transfer your mortgage to whomever you need. They don't have to worry about going through probate. The mortgage company puts it through their name. When somebody, transitions, you get 20 birth certificates. You could put transfer on demand on the bank accounts. So and all they need to do is just take, the death certificates. This is part of a death plan, so that not only are they grieving, not only are you dealing with, planning in the end of life. And, when we talk about end of life celebrations, they're for the living, not for the dead.
Mm-hmm.
The dead may want to say, oh, I want this at my end of life celebration, but that's for the grieving, and so sometimes when we're grieving, we go above and overboard and overspend, and that the funeral home industry sometimes takes advantages of families. So if you have all those things in place before you go, you don't lay that burden on, a spouse or children and things like that. So this is also one of the things that hospice helps you to plan. And like I said, and one of the trends now in my industry, people are having death cafes where they're literally having dinners. It's just as much as just the conversation that you and I are having, but it's with your middle-aged friends who are becoming the caregivers. And, we're in our middle, our second season of life, the second half of life, where we need to start thinking about what we want for ourselves. Because like I said, some of it, my kid, if I had to leave it to her, I would be in it. It'd probably be a little shaky, So we're having death cafes or death dinners, sitting around with our friends, and our friends are helping us hash through the emotional chaos that you kind of go through, that you have to deal. And it's easier to deal with it with the group for some people, to walk through those things and get those things hashed out.
In summary, maybe start with the conversation about your own end of life care, and then transition that into talking to a parent or a loved one about what their expectations are for end of life.
Yes. And like I said,
you
have to be respectful.
Yeah. And so I think, just managing that and knowing culturally and from a community perspective, how to initiate that conversation and it still be a very positive and one that people are not shying away from. So I think that's really important. So I'm so glad we had this conversation today. I think there were so many nuggets and takeaways. I cannot wait to hear the comments and feedback. So I'm looking forward to it. Thank you, Jocelyn, for joining us today.
You're welcome. You're more than welcome.